I lived 10 years believing his love protected us, until the day inside a Seoul courthouse, he declared in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear that my daughter wasn't his. And in that instant, I felt something inside me die and be reborn at the same time. The words still echo in my mind like the sound of glass shattering against concrete, sharp, irreversible, and so painfully real that even now, months later, I can feel the exact temperature of that courtroom, the way the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like trapped insects, and how my hands went numb holding my sleeping daughter against my chest. I was 32 years old, standing in a room full of strangers, watching the man I'd loved for over a decade look at me like I was a criminal, like I was nothing. Before I go any further, I need to ask you something. If you've ever felt invisible in your own life, if you've ever been accused of something so unthinkable that it made you question your own memory, your own truth, please leave a like and subscribe to this channel. I'm not just telling you a story, I'm showing you that you're not alone in this kind of pain, and I need you to know that surviving it, really surviving it, is possible. Stay with me. I never imagined my life would take this turn. I was just a simple woman from Gwangju, living in a small apartment with walls so thin I could hear my neighbor's television at night, the muffled sound of his footsteps above me in the early morning, even the gentle hiss of his tea kettle boiling at dawn. The smell of instant coffee in the morning and freshly cooked rice at night were the small certainties of my existence, humble anchors in a life that felt, for the most part, quietly ordinary. And in the middle of all that ordinariness, there was him, my husband, the man who held my hand during the harshest winter I'd ever faced, when the building's heating system failed, and we slept curled together under every blanket we owned, sharing the little warmth we had between us. When our daughter was born, he cried before I did. I remember that moment with such vivid clarity it feels like it happened yesterday. The delivery room was cold, sterile, filled with the antiseptic smell that clings to hospitals like a second skin. I was exhausted, my body aching in ways I'd never experienced, my hair stuck to my forehead with sweat. But when they placed her in his arms, this tiny, wrinkled, perfect creature wrapped in a pale pink blanket, he completely fell apart. His shoulders shook. Tears streamed down his face so fast he couldn't wipe them away quickly enough. The doctor actually had to ask him to step back because he was trembling so hard they were afraid he'd drop her. That image, him standing there crying, holding our baby like she was made of light, became etched into my memory like a living photograph. For years, that memory sustained me. Through the hard months when money was tight, through the long nights when she wouldn't stop crying, and we took turns walking her around the apartment, through every small argument and every moment of doubt, I would return to that image. I would tell myself that despite everything, despite the financial struggles, despite the cramped apartment, despite the exhaustion, I had a family. That was what mattered. That was everything. But things change, sometimes slowly, like rust creeping across metal. Sometimes so fast you don't even have time to breathe. It all started with a silence. Not the comfortable silence that settles between two people who know each other well, who can exist in the same space without needing to fill every moment with words. This was different. This silence had weight. It had texture. It felt deliberate, calculated, like he was building an invisible wall between us one quiet day at a time, and I couldn't understand why. I noticed it first in the small things. The way he'd come home from work and go straight to the bedroom without greeting me. The way he'd eat dinner while scrolling through his phone, his eyes fixed on the screen as if I wasn't sitting right across from him. The way he'd turn away from me at night in bed, his back a solid barrier, his breathing shallow and controlled. I asked him multiple times if something was wrong. Each time he'd shake his head, avoid my eyes and say, "I'm just tired." But his tiredness didn't feel normal. It felt like rejection. When I'd reach out to touch his shoulder, he'd flinch slightly, just enough for me to notice. He started leaving for work earlier and coming home later. He stopped asking about my day. He stopped looking at our daughter the way he used to, with that soft, overwhelming tenderness that used to make my heart swell, until the day he finally looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "I don't trust you anymore." Such a simple sentence, 7 words, but they cut through every layer of my being like a blade I never saw coming. We were in the living room. It was early evening, and the light coming through our small window was that particular shade of gold that makes everything look both beautiful and sad at the same time. Our daughter, she was 3 years old then, was playing on the floor with her blocks, humming a song she'd learned at daycare, completely oblivious to the fact that her entire world was about to crack open. I asked him what he meant. My voice came out smaller than I intended, already defensive, already afraid. He took a deep breath, the kind of breath someone takes when they're about to say something they can't take back, and he said it. "I think she's not my daughter." The words hung in the air between us like smoke. For a moment, I couldn't process what I'd heard. It was like my brain refused to translate the sounds into meaning. But then, slowly, horrifyingly, understanding crashed over me. My mouth went dry. My hands started shaking. The room tilted slightly. Or maybe it was me who tilted. I couldn't tell. "What?" I managed to whisper. He didn't repeat it. He didn't need to. Instead, he looked at our daughter, this beautiful, innocent child playing at our feet, and I saw something in his eyes that made my blood turn cold. Doubt, suspicion, distance. Have you ever watched someone you love turn into a stranger right in front of you? Have you ever seen the person who knew every part of your soul suddenly look at you like you're a liar? If you have, please, tell me, just so I know. Life wasn't only cruel to me. He left the house the next day, just packed a bag, called a taxi, and went to Seoul without explaining anything. I tried calling him, sent him dozens of messages, begged him to talk to me, to at least tell me where this terrible accusation was coming from. But he ignored everything. Complete radio silence. 2 weeks later, I received a court summons. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope, standing alone in our apartment's narrow hallway with the afternoon sun slanting across the floor. The legal language was cold and formal, but the meaning was devastatingly clear. He wanted a paternity test. He wanted to prove, in front of a judge, that I had betrayed him, that I was a liar, that our daughter, our beautiful, perfect daughter, was evidence of my infidelity. I had never felt so humiliated in my entire life. The days leading up to the court date felt like walking through fog. I went through the motions, waking up, feeding my daughter, taking her to daycare, cooking meals I could barely eat, lying awake at night staring at the ceiling. But inside, I was screaming. Inside, I was breaking into pieces so small I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to put myself back together. I kept asking myself, why? What had I done to make him believe such a horrible thing? Had I smiled at someone too warmly? Had I been too friendly with a male colleague? Had I somehow, without knowing it, given him a reason to doubt me? But no matter how many times I replayed our life together in my mind, I couldn't find an answer. The worst part wasn't even the accusation itself. The worst part was the loneliness. I couldn't tell anyone what was happening. How could I explain to my mother, who lived hours away in our hometown, that my husband thought I'd cheated on him? How could I face my few friends and admit that my marriage was falling apart in the most public, shameful way possible? So I carried it alone. Every morning, I'd wake up and look at my daughter, her small face peaceful in sleep, her tiny hand curled against the pillow, and I'd feel this overwhelming mixture of love and rage. Love for her, because she was innocent and perfect, and deserved none of this. Rage at him, for putting us through this nightmare. But I also felt something else, a tiny seed of strength, buried deep beneath all the pain and humiliation. A voice that whispered, "You know the truth. Hold on to that." The day of the court hearing arrived. It was raining that morning, one of those steady, relentless soul rains that turns the whole city gray and makes everything feel heavier. I took a taxi because I couldn't imagine navigating the subway while carrying my daughter and trying not to fall apart. I remember sitting in the back seat, watching the raindrops race down the window, each one blurring the city outside until nothing looked real anymore. My daughter slept against my shoulder, her breath warm and steady against my neck, completely trusting, completely unaware. When we arrived at the courthouse, I saw him standing near the entrance. He looked different, thinner, maybe. His face had new lines around his mouth, as if the past few weeks had aged him. He was standing under the awning, hands in his pockets, staring at the rain. When I walked up, he finally looked at me, and for just a moment, one brief, flickering moment, I thought I saw regret in his eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by that same cold distance. We didn't speak. What was there to say? Inside, the courthouse was all harsh lighting and polished floors that echoed with every footstep. The air smelled like old paper and floor polish and anxiety. We were directed to a small hearing room, and as we walked down the corridor, I could feel people's eyes on us. Court staff, other families waiting for their own hearings, lawyers in dark suits. They all seemed to be looking, wondering what our story was. The hearing room itself was smaller than I'd imagined. There was a table for the judge, a few chairs for us, and harsh fluorescent lights overhead that made everything look washed out and unforgiving. My daughter woke up as we sat down, looked around with confused eyes, and then settled back against me, sucking her thumb, a habit she only returned to when she was scared. The judge entered, a middle-aged man with reading glasses, and an expression that was neither kind nor cruel, just professional, detached. This was just another case to him, another file on an endless pile of human problems he had to sort through. He reviewed the documents, asked a few preliminary questions, and then nodded to the court clerk, who brought forward the DNA test results. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My hands were shaking. My daughter sensed my tension and wrapped her small arms around my neck, whispering, "Mama," in that tiny, worried voice that broke my heart. And then it happened. My husband, or the man I thought I knew, stood up. His voice was loud, too loud for the small room, and he said, "She's not my daughter." The words seemed to echo off the walls. People shifted in their seats. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me, judging, assessing, deciding whether I looked like the kind of woman who would do such a thing. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and shout that he was wrong, that he was destroying our family for nothing, that he was hurting our child in ways she wouldn't understand for years, but would definitely feel. But I couldn't move. I sat there, frozen, holding my daughter while shame and rage and grief crashed over me in waves. The judge opened the envelope. The sound was so loud in that silent room, the tear of paper, the rustling as he pulled out the document. He adjusted his glasses, read for what felt like an eternity, and then he looked up. According to the DNA analysis performed by the certified laboratory, the probability of paternity is 99.98%. There is no doubt. She is your biological daughter. The silence that followed was absolute. I watched my husband's face as the words sank in, watched the color drain from his cheeks, watched his mouth open slightly, as if he wanted to speak but had forgotten how, watched his hands grip the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw everything in his eyes, the shame, the realization of what he'd done, the knowledge that he'd accused his wife of the worst kind of betrayal based on, what? Paranoia? Insecurity? Something someone had said? But I felt nothing for him in that moment. No relief that I'd been proven right, no satisfaction that he'd been proven wrong, no desire to comfort him or understand what had driven him to this point. I just felt done. I stood up, still holding my daughter, and walked out of that courtroom without looking back. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air was fresh and clean, washed new. The sky was still mostly gray, but there was a break in the clouds, a thin line of pale blue light pushing through, tentative but persistent. I stood there on the courthouse steps, breathing in that after-rain smell, feeling my daughter's weight in my arms, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could actually breathe. If this story is touching a wound you carry, breathe with me. The truth hurts, I know, but the truth also sets you free. The months that followed were difficult in ways I hadn't anticipated. He tried to come back, called me repeatedly, sent long messages filled with apologies and explanations that didn't really explain anything. He said he'd been stressed at work, that someone had planted doubt in his mind, that he'd been foolish, paranoid, wrong. He wanted to come home. He wanted us to be a family again. He wanted me to forgive him and pretend it had never happened. But something inside me had fundamentally changed. Some door had closed that I couldn't reopen, no matter how hard he pushed against it. Because how do you forgive someone who looked at your child, your shared child, and publicly declared she wasn't his? How do you trust someone again after they've shown they're capable of believing the worst about you, based on nothing but their own insecurity? I couldn't. I filed for separation, started the long, painful process of untangling a life we'd built together, divided our few possessions, figured out custody arrangements, learned how to be a single mother in a society that still judges women who leave their marriages. There were nights when I cried so hard I thought I might shatter, nights when the loneliness felt like it would swallow me whole, nights when I questioned whether I was doing the right thing, whether I should just forgive him and try to make it work for our daughter's sake. But then I'd remember that courtroom. I'd remember the sound of his voice saying, "She's not my daughter." I'd remember the feeling of being accused, humiliated, treated like I was capable of something so cruel and dishonest, and I'd remember that I deserved better than that. More importantly, my daughter deserved better than that. One evening, about 6 months after the separation, I found myself walking alone across the Mapo Bridge. It was late autumn, and the air had that particular crispness that comes right before winter really sets in. The Han River below was dark and smooth, reflecting the city lights like scattered jewels. I stopped in the middle of the bridge, leaning against the railing, watching the water flow steadily beneath me. The wind was cold against my face, but it felt good, clean, honest. I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the humiliation, the fear, the loneliness, the slow, painful process of rebuilding myself into someone who could stand on her own. And I realized something. I had survived. Not just survived. I had grown. The pain had changed me, yes, but not in the way I'd feared. It hadn't made me bitter or closed off or afraid to trust. Instead, it had made me stronger, more certain of my own worth, more aware of what I would and wouldn't accept in my life. I thought about my daughter, waiting for me at home with my mother, who had come to stay with us for a few months. I thought about how she was growing up, watching me rebuild my life, learning through observation that it's possible to fall apart and put yourself back together, that you don't have to accept treatment that diminishes you, that being alone is better than being with someone who makes you feel small. The wind picked up, and I closed my eyes, letting it wash over me. "You survived," it seemed to whisper. And I had. The pain, the humiliation, the loneliness, the fear, all of it had transformed me, not in the way I'd expected or wanted, but in the way I needed. Today, I raise my daughter alone, and she is thriving. She's 5 now, full of energy and questions and laughter that fills our small apartment like music. She doesn't remember much about that time. She was too young, but she grows up seeing a mother who is strong, independent, and sure of her own worth. When she wraps her arms around my neck and says, "I love you, Mama," in that matter-of-fact way children have, I feel a truth so pure and so powerful that no doubt, from anyone, could ever erase it. I was reborn through her, and for her. Sometimes I see her father. Custody visits happen, brief and awkward, filled with things we don't say. He tries to be a good father to her now, though there's a distance there that wasn't there before, a crack that can never quite be repaired. I don't hate him anymore. I've moved past that. Hate takes too much energy, requires too much emotional investment, and I've learned to conserve my energy for things that matter, for building a life I'm proud of, for creating a home filled with love and stability for my daughter, for pursuing the small joys that make life worth living. I've gone back to school, started taking evening classes in graphic design, something I'd always wanted to do, but never had time for when I was trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect everything for everyone except myself. I've made new friends, women who are also rebuilding their lives after difficult endings. We meet for coffee, share our stories, laugh about the absurdity of it all, and remind each other that we're doing better than we think. I've learned to be alone without being lonely, and that, I think, is the greatest gift this terrible experience gave me. I used to think that love meant sacrifice, that being a good partner meant making yourself smaller so your partner could feel bigger, that marriage meant compromising your own needs and desires for the sake of keeping peace. But I was wrong. Real love doesn't require you to diminish yourself. Real partnership doesn't demand that you carry all the emotional labor while your partner checks out. Real commitment means both people showing up, being honest, and treating each other with respect even when things get hard. And if someone can't do that, if someone would rather believe the worst about you than have a difficult conversation, if someone would rather humiliate you in a courtroom than trust the life you've built together, then they don't deserve to be in your life. It's that simple, and it's that hard. If you've also fallen and gotten back up, comment, "I made it. I want to feel your strength. I want you to know that I feel your pain and your victory." There's a Korean saying my grandmother used to tell me when I was little, "Even the longest winter eventually becomes spring." I never fully understood it until now. For so long, I felt like I was trapped in an endless winter. Everything was cold, barren, difficult. I couldn't imagine ever feeling warm again. Couldn't imagine a time when I'd wake up and not immediately feel that heavy weight of sadness and anger pressing down on my chest. But slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice it happening, things began to thaw. There were small moments first. A morning when I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about the trial in several days. An afternoon when my daughter made me laugh so hard I forgot to be sad. An evening when I looked in the mirror and recognized myself again. Not the broken woman I'd been, but someone new, someone stronger. Spring didn't arrive all at once. It came in fragments, in tiny green shoots pushing through frozen ground. A good day here, a moment of genuine joy there, a night when I slept peacefully without nightmares. And eventually, those fragments accumulated into something real, into a new life, a new version of myself that I actually liked better than the old one. Because the old me, the one who lived with him, who tried so hard to be enough, who accepted his silence and his distance and his eventual accusation, that woman was smaller than I am now. She was afraid to take up space, afraid to demand respect, afraid to walk away from something that was hurting her, because she'd been taught that commitment meant staying no matter what. But this new version of me, she knows better. She knows that commitment to yourself matters more than commitment to someone who doesn't value you. She knows that being a good mother means showing your daughter what self-respect looks like, not teaching her to tolerate treatment that makes her feel worthless. She knows that sometimes love means letting go, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Last week, my daughter asked me why her father doesn't live with us anymore. She's old enough now to notice that her family looks different from some of her friends' families, old enough to start asking questions I knew were coming, but still wasn't quite prepared for. I sat her down, pulled her onto my lap, and chose my words carefully. Sometimes, I told her, people love each other but can't live together anymore, and that's okay. What matters is that both Mommy and Daddy love you very, very much, and you're safe, and you're loved, always. She thought about this for a moment, her small face serious, and then she asked, "Are you happy, Mama?" The question surprised me, such a big question from such a small person. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I realized the answer was yes. Not the simple, uncomplicated happiness I'd imagined when I was younger, when I thought happiness meant a perfect marriage and a house and stability, but something deeper, something more real. I was happy because I knew myself. I was happy because I'd survived something that could have destroyed me and come out stronger. I was happy because I was building a life on my own terms, making choices that honored who I really was, instead of trying to fit myself into someone else's vision of who I should be. Yes, I told my daughter, I am happy, and it was true. In the end, I learned something that has stayed with me like an invisible tattoo on my soul. You don't need anyone's approval to be enough. You don't need someone else to validate your worth. You don't need to prove yourself to people who have already decided not to see your value. What you need is to remember who you are, to stand firm in your own truth, to refuse to let someone else's doubt make you doubt yourself. That day in the courtroom, when the judge read those results, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt sad. Sad that it had come to this. Sad that my daughter had been caught in the middle of her father's insecurity. Sad that a love I'd believed in had crumbled so completely. But I also felt something else. Certainty. Certainty that I had done nothing wrong. Certainty that I had been a faithful wife and a good mother. Certainty that I deserved better than someone who would put me through that kind of public humiliation. And that certainty became the foundation I built my new life on. Korea taught me something else, too. This country, with its harsh winters and explosive springs, with its tradition of resilience and its rapid transformation, showed me that rebirth is always possible, that you can be one person in November and an entirely different person by April. That change, while painful, is also how we grow. I look at the cherry blossoms now when they bloom in spring, and I understand them differently. They're beautiful precisely because they're temporary. They bloom fully, completely, without holding back, knowing they'll fall within weeks. They don't diminish themselves. They don't apologize for taking up space. They just bloom, bright and bold and unapologetic. That's how I want to live now, fully, completely, without holding back, without making myself smaller for anyone. Sometimes I run into people who knew us as a couple, and I can see the questions in their eyes. They've heard rumors, I'm sure. In a society where everyone knows everyone, it's impossible to keep secrets, but I hold my head high. I have nothing to be ashamed of. I was accused of something terrible, proven innocent, and I walked away from a situation that was hurting me. That's not shame. That's strength. My mother, who worried so much when I first separated, now tells me she's proud of me. You're stronger than I was at your age, she says, and I believe her. Not because she was weak. She raised me alone after my father passed away, worked 2 jobs to keep us fed and housed, but because each generation learns from the one before. She taught me resilience by example, and now I'm teaching my daughter the same thing. The apartment where we live now is smaller than the one I shared with him, but it's ours, mine and my daughter's. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every choice, it all reflects who we actually are, not who someone else wanted us to be. The walls are covered with my daughter's drawings. The small balcony has plants I tend every morning. The kitchen smells like the soup I make from my grandmother's recipe. It's not perfect. We still struggle with money sometimes. I still have moments of loneliness, late at night when my daughter is asleep and the apartment is too quiet. I still have days when I question my choices, wonder if I should have tried harder to make it work. But then I remember that courtroom, that moment, that choice. And I know I made the right decision, because the greatest act of love isn't staying in a relationship that diminishes you. It isn't accepting treatment that makes you feel worthless. It isn't sacrificing your dignity for the sake of keeping someone else comfortable. The greatest act of love is choosing yourself. Choosing to honor your own worth even when no one else does. Choosing to walk away from something that's hurting you, even when society tells you to stay. Choosing to rebuild, no matter how many times you have to start over. My daughter will grow up knowing that her mother is strong, that her mother stood up for herself, that her mother chose self-respect over security, truth over comfort, authenticity over approval. And maybe, when she's older and facing her own difficult choices, she'll remember. She'll remember that her mother walked across a bridge on a cold autumn evening and decided to survive. She'll remember that survival isn't just about enduring, it's about transforming. She'll remember that even the longest winter eventually becomes spring, and she'll know that she comes from a long line of women who bloomed anyway. If this story touched you, leave a heart in the comments and share it with someone who needs to hear this. And remember, you are enough, exactly as you are. You don't need anyone's permission to take up space in your own life. You don't need anyone's approval to be worthy of love and respect. You already are. Today, I know something I didn't know a year ago. Losing someone can be the first step toward finding yourself. The pain my husband put me through, the doubt, the accusation, the public humiliation, didn't destroy me. It revealed me. It showed me reserves of strength I didn't know I possessed. It taught me that I could stand alone, that I could rebuild, that I could not just survive, but actually thrive. In Korea, even the harshest winter holds the promise of spring, and I finally found mine, not in someone else's arms, not in someone else's validation, but in my own reflection, in my own choices, in my own certain unshakable knowledge that I am enough, and I always was.